What now?
Hello and welcome back. So today our episode's all about reading. Reading for language learners and the importance, as well as some scientific discoveries that I made myself and how we can benefit from them. Right, so recently I made a TikTok or a YouTube short. I forget, not many people saw it, but we're going to discuss it here. And the subject was about a few books that I had read recently, namely 1984, the well-known comedy about Big Brother, The Lost Causes of Bleak Creek, Rhett Link from Good Mythical Morning wrote a horror story that's really cool. If you've ever seen a teen horror, it's sort of got all those elements. It's fun, it's lighthearted, it's mysterious, it's got a us against the world kind of vibe. It's amazing. And then finally, The Lucifer Effect. The Lucifer Effect was the guy who authored the Stanford prison experiment. He wrote a book, and essentially the book is focused on can anyone be good or bad depending on the situation, and what it draws on, and eventually what it spoiler if you haven't read it, stop or skip ahead. He focuses on environmental factors. Those are really what affect us, and that people are sort of a dial in the center that can be pushed left or right depending on what happens to us and so forth. Right, so 1984, I found, just a quick breakdown for anyone who's read it or who hasn't or might be thinking of it, super relevant today. Shows where things could possibly go to if things are pushed to the extreme. Also, I have a fun fact at the end of the episode, so if you're interested or if you want to hear a bit more about that, carry on. Another crazy thing that I found is with relevance to today specifically is the changing of words, right? So words have meanings, but in 1984, it's called Newspeak. And they have specific people. They have three ministries inside the government: the Ministry of Wealth, the Ministry of Plenty, and the third name is escaping me right now. And essentially the names sort of provide the opposite of what you expect them to, rather serve the government. It's really interesting. And what they're there to do is to reduce the amount of words that people could use for free speech to the point where they can only think of concepts that the government deems essential. And Newspeak is essentially updated and to agree with and to suit the needs of the government or state agenda. It's really interesting. Okay. The last thing I want to discuss just before we get into the main topics today is, The Lucifer Effect. If you haven't read it, it's quite long. It goes through a bunch of different scenarios of how things have happened, such as they go to the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, Stanford prison experiment. They look at the Hutus and Tutsis, and it's just fascinating to look at how a situation goes wrong. In fact, they even focus on World War II. And, we always look at things from an external point of view, like how could someone do that? They must be such a bad person. But when they really break it down and they show the effects of the environment and how people use their knowledge of the inner functioning of people, it's absolutely fascinating. Okay, so what we're going to look at now is, for anyone who's learning a language or who's thought of it or is currently doing it, reading out loud. Super, super important. Why? Well, let's get into that. Okay, so reading out loud, many, many benefits. What are the benefits? I'll tell you. Hold on. Patience. Right, so improving comprehension, really important. Duh. Fluency. You want to speak the language? That's why you're learning it. Where are you going with this, Daniel? Hang on there. Active listening. Active listening is super important, and we'll circle back to that. Some studies found that it could reduce stress. How is it reducing stress? Well, when you're reading, your mind can still sort of wander, but when you're speaking and reading at the same time, you have to focus all of your attention. And this leads to something called the production effect. Right, now the production effect is super interesting. It was found by McLeod, Gopi, Horian, Neary, and Osbuco in 2010. Right, so why is this so important and how can we benefit from it? Okay, well, in this one study published in the Journal of Sage PubMed, participants improved their memory by pronouncing words out loud. So the one group read certain words out loud and not others in the second list. So they'll provide 2 lists. The second group of participants were only exposed to a single list and also showed memory improvements for the words they said out loud. The cool part is that the study showed that by reading a word out loud, mouthing the word, or even saying a non-word, so this is a word that doesn't exist in any language, the participants were better able to remember the word. And the last option was just simply saying yes out loud, which wasn't any more beneficial than reading in your head or reading silently. So they noted benefits up to a week later, which is really interesting. And also that benefits for fill in the blank exercises. People were also more likely to be able to use them in conversations that they had previously used themselves. But there was an interesting thing here that I thought was interesting. So the study suggested that cued recall improved, but not free recall. So cued recall is like, we're chatting, oh my god, how's your day? Oh, this happened, they spilled the coffee on you again. Oh, that reminds me. That's cued recall. You provided a piece of information that triggered what I already know. Free recall, there's no contextual information, there's no hint provided. I'm able to freely remember it. And when learning languages, you essentially build both. But free recall is more of a sign of fluency because you on your own accord can decide how and when, and you can impose your will, so to speak, on a conversation in order to guide it in a certain direction, which is, really beneficial. There's also another big benefit of reading, which is called narrative transportation. What is narrative transportation? You're reading a book, right? You're really enjoying it. Through the process of reading, you indirectly, one way or another, you incarnate, you take on the personality, the perspective, the views of this person. Whether you're reading, taking advantage of the production effect, or you're just reading normally, silently. You're taking on this person's views, perspective. You're seeing the world through their eyes. So many advantages. Being transported to the world where it takes place, super cool, at least in your mind. And I think that this temporarily, allows us to separate from ourselves. Incarnating this form allows us to take on perspectives that we might not have seen before because we're seeing it through a new point of view. This perspective is now from a person. We allow ourselves to see these new things without the biases or our personal beliefs impeding us from getting there, because normally there might be something that we believe, but we're like, no, because this happened to me in the past or because of my family or friends, I can't see that. But when you take on a perspective based on someone who they lost their jobs, this is the 5th job and it didn't work out again, you're like, why are they so pessimistic about the world? You're like, oh, well, in this case, I can see it and it sort of makes more sense. So in that case, it's really beneficial. I also have a theory that part of the production effect and why it's so useful and how it ties to narrative transportation, which sort of piggybacks on the production effect when reading, is that we personalize it. Now, obviously, our brains are wired to prioritize what's important to us in order to help us survive. Learning triggers neuroplasticity. The brain is always trying to learn and update and revise what's needed and how to best use it. And I think by reading out loud, it adds an extra layer of personalization. We signal to the brain like, hey, dude, we need this shit. Remember it, please. I skipped dinner for the 5th time. I really have no friends and it can't drop into the negatives. So let's remember this. And essentially by adding that layer of personalization, our brain's like, okay, kind of got a point. Let's try to keep this on. And the more and more we do it, we signal to it like, hey, we really need this. And then over time, it helps us better improve cued recall and free recall, both of which are super important in your day-to-day life for your native language and even more for a new language that you're learning. I'm not a scientist. This is just something that I'm passionate about. I find interesting, but it does really help me understand better, like why people say, well, when you read, how do you become more intelligent? Reading is just a book, and I never really understood it. And when I came across narrative transportation, I was like, oh, wow, this makes sense. It's not just learning big words that we kind of know how to use, that we may be trying to use to show off or impress, but it's like, oh no, we're indirectly thrown into this world of the person, and in order to continue in the story, we have to unlock the door with their perspectives, and we're sort of indirectly forced to see things from their point of view, which I find, super fascinating. Okay, and then there's another idea that people have proposed: slow reading. Slow reading is sort of the idea of going extra slow, much slower than normal, in order to grasp, absorb, and really digest every morsel of information. The idea is that you'll better understand the story, you won't miss as many context clues, and sort of you'll be more well versed in whatever's going on. Now, I think if you're learning a new language, this is really important because you need as many pieces of the puzzle as possible. You want to put them together. You want to learn how to rearrange them. That's super important. If it's your native language, not as much, but it depends on the context. Like if it's a really rich story and you want to grasp as many details as possible, sure. But if it's something more benign, a recipe or something that's not as detailed, then I'm sure you can skip over it. Active listening, right? So slow reading is focused on reading stuff that's, written on a page, duh. Active listening is, especially when it comes to languages, I found fascinating. Now, there's a really simple approach you can take to this. We don't need to break it down. Essentially, listening with intent. But with languages, I think we can go one step beyond that. What we want to look at is like as if every question that's being said, the conversation could be stopped. Everyone in the room, all three people, would turn to us and be like, okay, answer the question. What's being said? So if you're listening to a video, if you're listening to a podcast, whatever you're listening to, think of the answer to that question in your head and act as if you're answering it, right? Because that really puts you on blast. You can't say, well, no, I understood a part of it. No, if you're not able to understand it, that's a clear perspective. And, with languages especially, if you don't know something or something's bothering you, struggling with it, it's a clear example. Go in that direction. Chase the unknown. It sucks and you feel like a moron a lot of the time, but it happens to everyone and it's the best way to get fluent. Okay, so these were just some of the things that I thought were interesting. I never really delved into reading and some of the specific techniques. These were things that I'd been doing a lot of my time. These are things that I've been doing for a while. And yeah, it just sort of piggybacks on, how the brain already works. We seem to be wired to learn things audibly, and the production effect, is definitely useful by not just reading, but saying them out loud. We sort of add more perspective to words. So the way you want to think of it is, say you've got a shape, right? A shape of many different sides. And when you read, you're slowly painting each side. Conversations change, environments change. You don't always hear things in the same way. But what you're doing by pronouncing them over and over and over again, you're painting the sides. You're painting one side, then another. Maybe even come back to it. You make the color richer, more vibrant. The point is, you want to be able to say things, hear things, and understand them regardless of the context. You're trying to become water. Essentially adapt to any situation. This is sort of these are some techniques that I found, and if you liked it, I hope you did. I love doing these things. I'll be doing more on languages and other topics. If you're interested, share this, subscribe, let me know what else I could do, and this was a blast. So if you made it this far, thank you, and I will see you next time. Bye bye. And then lastly, if you stuck around, if you're still here, I got something really cool for you. So, anyone who's familiar with the anime Psycho-Pass will sort of understand where I'm going with this. So, Psycho-Pass, in the society, they use a system that analyzes and predicts how likely an individual is to commit a crime in the future. Then, based on this rating, they're either sent to prison or they're only allowed to do certain jobs. Now, this sort of freaked me out because I read 1984 and a lot of the suppression of information or blatantly changing facts is happening there is starting to happen today. Now with Psycho-Pass, I was like, well, that's an anime, until I was watching a YouTube video last week and I came across this article. Well, I found it in the video and I decided to look into it myself. The article is entitled Korean Researchers Develop AI CCTVs to Detect Predict Criminal Activities. So the Korean government has developed an AI-powered surveillance system that's analyzed almost 33,000 hours of footage and claims to do two things. One, it creates a predictive map of where crimes are likely to happen that the people in the control system, the operators, will be able to say, okay, at night between 8 and 10, pickpocketings are on the rise. The second is it's able to predict how likely an individual is to commit a certain crime. Now, in Psychopaths, we're living in the current system where people are already being punished based on things that they haven't done that the system deems probable. So for example, a child is born, they have a high psychopath score. Okay, they can only work as a detective or lower jobs, or they have to spend their whole lives in prison because based on these parameters, this is likely to happen. The scary thing is this could lead to a situation where people are being punished based on data that says, well, a person with these 3 traits will always lead to a criminal, and thus it's better to punish them now. And this could really get out of control. Now, while 1984 focuses mainly on free speech and suppression of ideas, this is surveillance. And it also includes that. Now, if you combine these two together, it's absolutely terrifying. So deja vu, if anyone speaks French, already seen, which I think is sort of like a subtle reference to the Big Brother, the all-seeing eye in 1984. That's essentially the state system that watches you, that's omnipresent, and that knows that everything you're doing. So the system says that it's able to analyze areas with high probability of criminal activities by categorizing the time, location, and type of incidents, with the accuracy rate for the predictive crime map was 82.8%. Now, as we all know with AI, it's only going to get better in the future. And the questions are, how are they going to use it? And will it end up like Psychopath? Or will we learn and perhaps guide ourselves in a safer direction for once, a technology that actually helps us, that doesn't set a group of us back in the past while others benefit from it? This episode is showing off way too much my personality, but no, basically the episodes are going to change. It won't always be so sciencey. Other times it'll be different topics, I'm not sure, but basically it'll change from week to week. And yeah, if you like, please share. In the beginning it's really important. And if you have any suggestions, please let me know. I'll respond to all the comments, and yeah, I really appreciate it. Hope to see you soon. For this time, for real, bye bye.